Update is joined by Jon Snow, a celebrated British journalist who has been the face of Channel 4 News since 1989. Jon Snow, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine.
Firstly, Channel 4 has recently devoted a portion of its nightly news segments to exploring the topic of fake news. Do you think fears of the rise of fake news having contributed to the election of Donald Trump are well-founded?
I do think that the social network and the capacity to use the social network for fake news have definitely made an impact. On which side, it's harder to say, but I think they have made an impact. I think, for example, that if you think of the claim that Pope Francis supported Trump, which of course was totally untrue, that was seen by at least 1 million people before the Vatican got a denial out. And so for a time, and possibly thereafter, people really thought the Pope supported Trump.
And on that note, are people right to be bleak when looking at the current global political climate?
I think it is pretty bleak at the moment. And I think it's for a whole lot of reasons. I think it is hard to go into politics and into leadership. It's controversial. You're bound to be shouted at. You're going to be abused. We never, I think, ever imagined that if you freed up the digital age to enable mass communication with each other, that it would lead to bullying and abuse, but it has. So you have to be a tough nut to go into a politician's life. But I think the other real issue is that politicians aren't paid very well, generally. There are often too many of them. I think that people need to look at their political structures and realise that if you don't pay people properly and equip them with real research and the rest of it, then we'll get very poor leadership.
So is what's happening now, is it an exceptional time where have we reached a turning point in history, or is it much like what we've seen before?
Well, you know about history. I mean, the truth is you never know until it's happened. But I think this is a bad time. I believe that in the late 1930s there was a very bad dearth of leadership, but I wasn't around then, so I don't know. But it does feel as if this is a turning point, yeah.
And now with so much information available today at the click of a button, is the public more vulnerable to being misled, or will it become more discerning?
I would put it the other way. I think the public have the wherewithal to inform themselves better than at any time in history. The question is, will they? I think they'll have to. They'll have to inform themselves of what's going on in their world, because if they don't, they'll fall prey to the agents of fake news.
So in 2014, you shared a video blog detailing your visit to the Gaza Strip during Operation Protective Edge. You shared what you saw as a result of the conflict with Israel and what you personally found harrowing. So what would you say to critics who would suggest that it is the duty of broadcast journalists to remain impartial?
I think it is a duty of journalists to remain impartial, but I think that there comes a moment in humanity that when a human being, whether he's a reporter or she is, just an ordinary civilian, whatever it is, when you're confronted with something which really is an abomination, then you have a duty to expose it. And part of reacting to it, perhaps just as a human being, is actually to combat it. And I think too often journalists think, no, it's my professional duty to remain above all this. No, the fact is, when you see something utterly unacceptable, you have to let people know.
So then, do the BBC and Channel 4, along with other British media outlets, have an obligation to remain neutral when speaking about Donald Trump or his state visit to the UK?
Well, let's first of all work out what you mean by neutral. What's the neutrality between you and me? You're a woman, I'm a man, you can have a baby, I can't. I can provide you with a baby, you can't provide me with a baby in the sense that you can't fertilize one to me without me. So there's no neutrality there. I believe in objectivity, which is standing back and looking and then saying trying to report what you think you can see. I think as far as Trump is concerned, I mean, I think he himself has waived any right to being reported, dispassionately. the fact is that you have a situation which we've never seen before, which is the most powerful leader of the most powerful country in the world, is clearly different from any that we've ever seen before. And I think consequently you report them rather differently.
Mm-hmm. And in 2011, your investigative documentary into the alleged war crimes in the final weeks of the civil war in Sri Lanka contained a lot of amateur video footage taken by civilians and soldiers. So with increased access to mobile phone technology globally, what do you see as the future of citizen journalism?
Well, I think citizen journalism is always going to be very, very important, and probably more important. The point about that film was that many of these phones were abandoned on the battlefield, and we picked them up and we processed what one could see on them. In many cases, people filmed, if not their own deaths, the circumstances leading up to their deaths. It was real testimony from people who lived through it. And you can't deny that. I mean, the Sri Lankan government challenged it, said it was all fake. Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations had it verified. And it did, in fact, play a part in getting rid of the leadership of Sri Lanka, who had organised this appalling atrocity.
And much of the footage was very graphic. So at what point do you say that showing the full reality of a situation in the news is inappropriate?
Well, I think it's inappropriate in prime time, always. But in this case, it was put out at 11 o'clock at night. Now, that doesn't mean that children won't have seen it. But you can make an effort to be protective. But at the same time, you cannot use the protection of the innocent to avoid showing the mass of the population what's going on.
So research done by the London School of Economics in July found that 75% of press coverage misrepresents Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, with a fifth of articles in the newspapers denoting him as dangerous. They concluded that this is highly problematic from a democratic perspective. Do you think that this is fair, or does Jeremy Corbyn simply make so many political mistakes that he warrants this kind of negative media attention?
Well, you're asking me a political question in a way. You're sort of asking me what I think of Jeremy Corbyn. Well, I'll tell you what I think of Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's an honest, decent politician who circumstances threw into the leadership. Now, I'll tell you, I did an interview with Glenda Jackson, who was a great actress who became an MP. She wasn't the greatest MP. She was one of the greatest actresses of all time. And she's recently come back at the age of 80 to play King Lear. She was absolutely brilliant. Anyway, in the course of an interview about that, I asked her about Jeremy Corbyn. Oh, she said, I'd have nominated him. I would have wanted a man from the left on the ballot paper, but I never thought in a million years he'd ever be elected. You can't have a man who sits behind a placard all day having meetings that never agree to anything. And I thought, well, there's somebody from the left of the Labour Party. I'm afraid she's right. And probably the LSE research represents the truth.
So does he want to be Prime Minister?
Shall I let you into a secret? I don't think so.
On that note, does criticism of the biased media on the part of Donald Trump in a more aggressive manner than Corbyn's pose a real threat to press freedom?
I don't think so, no. I think the media have represented Donald Trump pretty accurately, to be honest. And I think he knows it, and in fact trades on it. I think he wants to be represented like that. That's who he thinks he really is. It's extraordinary. I mean, look, if he doesn't want to be portrayed like that, he shouldn't behave like that. But I've not really seen any evidence that he's being misportrayed.
But with publications like the New York Times being excluded from press briefings, is it an actual threat to the freedom of the press, or will things carry on as usual?
I think things will carry on as usual, but I don't think a president should have the right to exclude anybody from his press conferences.
And finally, what advice would you give to young people who are interested in pursuing journalism as a career?
I think you should use everything that's at your disposal as a citizen journalist. You should blog and you should tweet and do whatever you want to do and retrieve information. Get active. But at the same time, I think that if you're considering where to go to university and all the rest of it, what courses to read, do not read journalism. I would broaden your mind and recognise that you can become a journalist in 3 or 4 weeks, and then it'll take the rest of your life to become any good. And that's what I'm still working at, trying to get any good. And in the meantime, I mean, there are more schemes now for apprentices, for interns. And frankly, if you're at all good, there's a good chance you'll get snapped up. If you want to do it badly enough, not do the job badly, but if you want to do it urgently enough, you'll do it. It is a trade that you will succeed in, and it's a good one.
Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you, Catherine.